What's up guys, Part-Time Gamer Dad here, and today I'm going to give you my review of Princess Peach Showtime. I originally played the demo of this game back around the time that the game was going to drop, and after playing it, I wasn't really so sure how I felt about it. I thought it was an okay game, but it wasn't enough to encourage me to buy the actual game. And I'm a huge Mario fan, I'm a big Nintendo fan, so I was kind of hyped for it, but at the same time, after playing that demo, I had some issues about whether or not I would actually purchase the game. Fast forward to last week, I see it on pre-owned at a GameStop, so I pick it up knowing full well that I have 7 days to beat this game before I can return it to get my money back. So that's what I did. I beat it within a week, and now I'm going to tell you my thoughts and my review on Princess Peach Showtime. Now, regarding the plot and the setting of the game, I thought it was really cool and interesting to kind of put it in this theater where there's a lot of plays going on, themed around different action type heroes or different occupations. And I think that it kind of fell in line with what we see from a lot of Mario games. It felt very familiar in that way. It also felt familiar that you utilized essentially power-ups and saw them kind of develop throughout the course of the 3 different levels you played whenever you got the power-up of each respective kind of position that you're playing throughout the game. Now in the game, there's 10 different personas that you take on, 10 different characters that you step into, and each of those have 3 levels that you play throughout the game. My issue is that they're all broken separately from each other. So whereas the first level of the theater might have 4 different rooms, they're all going to be very different occupations or personas that you occupy and play through that level. And while this isn't inherently bad, I think for me that it kind of killed the pacing of the game, and it didn't allow me to fully immerse into that story or maybe that persona and really get a full grasp of it before I was taken out of it. I would have liked to see a longer term, each persona you probably spent a total of 45 minutes in, so it was 15-minute chunks. If that was more cohesive and you saw the entire persona, levels 1, 2, 3, including that boss, because each of them had a boss or a final puzzle or mission that kind of felt climactic, that would have felt better, because I had played through all the first and second stages for each persona at first, and then by the time I got to the end, it was climax after climax after climax.
What did he say?
A little overwhelming, a little overstimulating, and a little all right, let's go do this next final mission for this persona. So from that perspective, it was okay, but I thought the pacing of it could have been better. Now, and this is where we're going to kind of get into some spoilers, so if you don't want the spoilers on Princess Peach Showtime, click away, go play it, and come back to this video. But essentially, after you complete all 4 of the rooms on each respective level of the theater building, which there's 5 and then there's a basement, there's this door that you can go and you can put in these things called sparkles, and you earn them throughout each stage, each level that you play. And after you provide enough sparkles, then you get to go into essentially a boss fight. And these boss fights were actually some of my most favorite boss fights I've ever experienced within a Mario type game or a Mario universe game. And to be fair, similar to the personas, each boss fight was unique in and of itself. Now, I will say that while they were unique, they were not difficult, but to understand how to damage some of these bosses did take a little bit of trial and error, because it wasn't necessarily spelled out for you. Speaking of gameplay, I do have a bit of an issue with the gameplay itself. All of the action that you do within the game is the B button, and that's not a problem at all. A is jump, B is action, that's fine. My issue is that every single thing you do, for the most part, kind of comes down to either timing or button mashing. It didn't feel like there was a whole lot of strategic approach needed when you were going from persona to persona, because pushing the B button resulted in the same thing. So it was kind of like a new coat of paint, and you were just pushing that button to get the same result, whether it was fighting somebody, investigating something, and a lot of times it just ended with you hitting B really, really fast or holding B down until you got to the desired result. Now, like I said, while I don't think this was necessarily an issue, I do think it kind of limited the game into what it could actually be, and as a result, it made it more of a chore to play through each of the levels versus enjoying them fully. Similarly, in terms of gameplay, as you're progressing through all the levels, there's a number of sparkles that you can get. It ranges anywhere between 5 and 10, and while some of them are very clear and you are encouraged to investigate the levels, sometimes there will be no, like you can investigate and there's no clear indicator of where the sparkles come from that you're missing, but you'll just miss them inherently. And it's pretty frustrating because some levels it's very clear, very direct, very intuitive about where they are. And other levels, I still to this day cannot tell you where those missing sparkles were. The nice thing is you don't need to collect all of them to progress through the game, so there's a little bit of grace there. I think at most I only needed to collect maybe about 60 sparkles, but I got well over 100, so definitely I think that's kind of where the ranging level of difficulty comes from. It's pushing yourself to actually get those sparkles, and that's where the difficulty measure comes from, because there's only like one setting of actual difficulty on the game. Now I was thinking about how do I rate this game, and I think the only way I could do is actually by ranking each of the different, and I'm calling them personas, but I mean, honestly, they're like transformations, but we'll just call them personas because that's what I'm calling them. So I'm going to rank all the personas, give you my score in each persona, and then we'll average it out, and that'll be my score for the review on Princess Peach Showtime. Coming in at number 10 is Pastry Chef Peach. This particular persona wasn't very fun. You're cooking batches of cookies to compete against enemies or defeat enemies and turn them back into happy little citizens of the theater. And I didn't mind it, but man, it was so frustrating sometimes, especially on some of these timed rounds and you're trying to keep the little minions from like breaking down the walls. I give it a 3 out of 10, easily the weakest, but there was some very stiff competition at the bottom of the list. Because coming at number 9 was Detective Peach, and while this initially was one that I was like, oh my gosh, I could do so much with this, it didn't really translate very well because this was one of those levels or personas with all the different stages where all you're doing is going around and you're looking at things, and there's deductive reasoning, but it's pretty spelled out for you. I think it was different enough that it made it not at the bottom of the list, but it definitely was a little frustrating, and everything felt much longer. Like I felt like I was living in this world longer, but not in a way that was necessarily fun, like in a way that was, it's dragging and the story is just taking so much longer to flesh out. And as a result, by the end of the actual stages for the detective, I actually was kind of way over it. So this one I give 3.5 out of 10. Coming in at number 8, we do see a little bit of a leap in quality, and that one is the Figure Skater Peach. Now, I don't necessarily have anything inherently wrong with Figure Skater Peach. I think a lot of it had to do with the registration of movement, and also some of the combat elements in this particular persona were difficult. Whenever any of the enemies are pirouetting, you can't attack them, but they'll pirouette right as you're going into fighting with them, and it's just like confusing and frustrating. So I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it, and there was also some pieces of it that the registration that you would think would work doesn't, and sometimes you do things that you're like, there's no way that worked, and then it registers it correctly. So there was a lot of contradiction within these stages, and so for that alone, I give it a 4.5 out of 10. Coming in at number 7 is Mermaid Peach. Now, my wife is named Ariel, not after The Little Mermaid. She was born right before Little Mermaid came out, but I've always kind of had an affinity for mermaids as a result of that. This character was so confounding for me because whenever you are going through the levels, you sing. That's your power, and you use your voice to control all of the fish around you, and you collect more fish, and you help like open up clamshells, or you can get into like tight spaces with them through grates and like save people or get some sparkles. Really cool, like interesting concept. The issue is that to take the fish with you like into the next section, you have to sing, guide them to the edge of the screen, go over, and it really killed the pacing of like progression through the levels and stages. And a big thing for me in all video games is pacing. Like, how are we doing with the pacing from level to level, from story beat to story beat, and just is it flowing well? And this one had really big issues with flow. The other issue was at the end of each level, essentially, you had this big concert, and sometimes you would miss like one fish because you didn't notice that it was coming back to you. You had already hit it, but then it was coming back to you in a different direction. And if you missed one at the very beginning of that concert, you didn't get the sparkle, and in order to get back to that section of the game, you had to restart the whole level over. So some of my frustration with sparkle acquisition actually comes from the Mermaid Peach levels. I'm talking about Mermaid Peach a lot. It's a 5 out of 10. It's fine. It's just fine. But there's so many better personas in the rest of the game. At number 6, this one's also really conflicting for me, and it's the Dashing Thief Peach. This one is very interesting because it's more stealth based, and obviously you have like some kind of combat element. You shoot out an electrified wire to take out these robotic enemies throughout the levels, and you're also using like zip lines, and you're kind of sneaking around the levels, and it's fine. But also this comes back to registration, and like sometimes things are moving a little too fast that you don't even have an opportunity to really understand what's happening, and you miss things along the way, or you'll die all the time just due to lack of like the actual button input not registering correctly. So you said I want to go this way, it's going this way, and now you fall to your death. So it was fine. It was one that I think if they wanted to do a little bit of tweaking, this is one you could actually probably make into a game. It's a really interesting concept. Maybe not with Peach, but it kind of gave me some Sly Cooper vibes, which, you know, maybe the game's already been made. It's just a little bit different, and it's got its own flavor. But I gave this one 5.5 out of 10. Number 5, I was talking about this earlier, it's Cowgirl Peach. Now, in terms of like uniqueness in a video game, there's nothing inherently unique about cowboys, cowgirls in video games. Red Dead is the biggest cowboy video game experience of all time. This was good. I think it got the flavor and the tone of like a melodramatic early 1900s silent movie that's based around a western or a cowboy, cowgirl trying to save someone. This is really where the registration issues came into effect for me. If registration issues hadn't been a factor in this particular level, we're talking like 7.5 out of 10. It did significantly impact my enjoyment of this, and it kept me from getting sparkles that I saw, that I knew where they were, and I couldn't get them in time, and it was very frustrating. So as such, I can only give this a 6 out of 10. These next 4, the top 4, are actually really, really decent. The first one is at number 4, we got Kung Fu Peach. Now, Kung Fu Peach, for all of its faults, is really fun, and I think the setting and kind of the overall, it's all taking place like in the context of a play. I really think like all of the story beats within it, like it feels very theatrical in nature, and it's very like almost over the top. Like your sensei, the sensei of all of the Kung Fu little people, dies right at the beginning of the first stage, and I love that. It's very self-aware, and as a result of that, I really enjoyed it. What I didn't enjoy was this is really where button mashing became massively annoying, and it was like timing plus button mashing. So it wasn't like you could just sit there and button mash. It wasn't like you were just timing. You were having to put the two together, but also there wasn't enough time to respond if button mashing wasn't the answer. Or if it was the answer and you didn't realize and you think you're just going for one kick, like a block, then you have to keep hitting the button over and over. It was just very frustrating, and I never died in any of these characters, any of these levels, and I didn't even come close to Kung Fu, but it took me longer than it should have taken me, because the combat gameplay and the registration and the way they approach like you actually completing these levels was so non-intuitive to a gamer. So for all those faults, I still give it a 7 out of 10, strictly because the way they presented this particular persona and the self-awareness they had was amazing. At number 3 is, I mean, arguably, it's at my number 3, so it's not my favorite, but it might be the most fun, and that is Mighty Peach. So this is kind of, if you've seen anything about Princess Peach Showtime, this is the space, this is kind of like the Samus-like suit that you are overpowered in, and you're fighting aliens, and you're fighting space invaders and spaceships, and it kind of gives the feel of like a Saturday morning cartoon on steroids. And I really enjoyed like all of the things they integrated into it, right? There's like buses laying on the street, so you pick up a bus and you throw it at a spaceship, and it just felt really kind of corny and over the top, but that's what I loved about it. Not many registration issues. The major issues really had to do with more about not understanding that there were different types of enemies, and you start reacting to enemies the same as you would with any other enemy within a level, And if you get hit once in certain levels, you don't get a sparkle, but it's so far into the level, it's not worth like leaving the entire level just to get back to that point. And so I had some issues with, again, the pacing, the structure of the levels. Also how it just wasn't intuitive to know that that one's gonna shoot at me and that one's gonna ram me. And so that was frustrating. Also, there's no objectives necessarily within these games, like within these levels and these personas. So that definitely hindered it as well. And sometimes you didn't know what you were supposed to be doing in terms of like, escort mission for Mighty Peach. And I think that docked it a little bit. But overall, pretty solid. I give it an 8 out of 10. So between number 1 and number 2, it was so close. It's an 8.5 at number 2 and a 9 out of 10 at number 1. So at number 2, I'm going to give it to the Sword Fighter. Now the Sword Fighter is actually the one that you play in the demo, and it's one of those things where I think when people saw Princess Peach Showtime, this is kind of what they expected the whole game to be like, and it rightfully so. It's a lot of fun. It actually is the first, like, all the things you learn about the game are through the lens of the Sword Fighter. So even like the first final stage that you do for Persona, it's, I think, automatically the Sword Fighter, and it kind of tells you what the story layout will be like. You're going to do a first level, you're going to do a second level, and you're going to do this third final mission with the boss fight, save what's called a Sparkla, which is like the actual star of that persona. And then that is really like your foundation for what Princess Peach Showtime is going to be like. As a result of that, I thought it did a great job setting the stage. I think just like any other, it's a lot of button mashing, and that's my biggest issue with that combat element, that and registration, which I know I keep just saying the same thing over and over, but that's because every single issue and flaw in the game is replicated within each individual persona and those relevant levels, and then just gets compounded when you get to some of the weaker personas. But all that being said, 8.5 out of 10, great foundation to lay the game on, but there was one persona that I liked a little bit more. Like I said, at number 1, it's a 9 out of 10, and that is the Ninja persona. So the Ninja persona is my favorite because it's so different from all the others, and I feel like I was playing a little bit of like Sekiro or a little bit of like Ghost of Tsushima, which I know that's more a samurai based game, but like it's just kind of the sneaking through the grass and you hop into the water and you're breathing through the bamboo shoot, or you're using like a cloaking device that's reflecting like the light that the different samurai enemies are trying to find you with, and it's blending you into the wall. There's flipping doors, and it's a little bit more like puzzle like. It's not always about just going in, and it's definitely not about button mashing, which I really appreciate. I think my only issue is that there are parts of the levels that don't necessarily make a whole lot of sense. Like, you know what you should do, but like this jump to this jump you can make, and then this jump to this jump you can't make, and it's kind of confusing because they're building it around a different approach for each like unique situation regarding the enemies and regarding like guard tracks, and you got to kind of follow people around, wait for them to turn around. And then I accidentally skipped a whole part of a level because I jumped past everybody, and I feel like I missed a sparkle because of that. So all those reasons aren't enough to take away the fact that this is the best persona by far. If you're gonna play through any 3 stages of any like one character in Princess Peach Showtime, play the ninja ones. It's definitely the most fun. So that brings our overall score. When you average all of those individual persona scores out, I gotta give Princess Peach Showtime, and I think it's an appropriate score, a 6 out of 10. Look, it's not a bad game. It's not Ride to Hell Retribution. It's not Lord of the Rings Gollum. It is a game developed by Nintendo, probably my favorite video game developer of all time. If you look at all the stuff that I have on my wall, it's all Zelda, it's all Mario. I'm wearing a Majora's Mask shirt right now. I've got the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild map here. I got the Tears of the Kingdom lithograph right there. I love Nintendo. This game just isn't on the same level as most like adventure side-scroller Mario games. It's got a lot of great humor. It gave me some throwback vibes of some like early Paper Mario games with some of the humor, some of the character development. Not nearly on that level, but it was, you could see like some of the spirit of it, and it was essentially a side-scroller. So nothing new or innovative, but for what they were trying to go for, I think they accomplished what they set out to do. And for all that, like, I can't fault Nintendo, but it is a 6 out of 10. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Like the video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Let me know down below what you thought of Princess Peach Showtime. Let me know if you are going to play it, if you haven't yet. Like, does this video make you want to play it? If you had to pick one persona, or if you have played it and you have one preferred persona, who is it? Let me know in the comments below. I'll see you very soon.